Oh yeah, we totally weren't recording it. Somehow like turned off at some point.
Oh, it's probably because I said boojaloo.
Yeah, yeah. But we are recording now, so it picked up that. So we'll just start over
I
from
won't
here.
say it. I won't say it again.
Yeah, yeah, definitely don't say it again. Yeah, people will just have to like, we're not going to explain it this time, so people will just have to like Google it. They can
Yeah.
crash their own computers. So yeah, we were talking about Venus and different signs and what we like and what we don't like, and how it's like kind of hot when it's in detriment, but and then we were talking about psychedelic Sundays and like using the Uranus and Taurus to like kind of, and Saturn and Capricorn to kind of schedule in ecstatic experiences, and then just kind of catching up to speed in case the previous recording did like cut somewhere that made sense. But maybe
Sure.
just jump right into like some poetry. Did you have anything picked out that you wanted to read?
Yeah, I would love to share some poets that I think really just exemplify kind of what poetry is to me. Just because it is such a. Can you still hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that. It's kind of loud. Yeah, I mean it is just such a rich. It's like a rich but punishing practice. I think it's sort of like it's a bit harder to sit down and read something that demands your attention in this like particular way than it is maybe to like listen to music sometimes or to go look at a painting. And I think but it also just has this rich tradition of being really connected with kind of song and the just tradition of verse and storytelling. And I like the way that it relates to the occult. So yeah, I picked out some work from Ariana Reigns, who is a contemporary poet that I really like. And she has an interest in astrology. She's also very, I mean, her voice isn't necessarily, she's not an occult voice, I wouldn't say, but these kind of elements intersect with her work a lot. And so I just thought I would share a poem that I like a lot by hers. Let me find that.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that she was contemporary when you had sent me some of her work and some other poems, and there was some Baudelaire, and then there was some Reed Dragonette and Arlene Sakowski,
Yeah.
and then I looked up Ariana Reigns, and I was like, oh wow, this is like right now.
Yeah, I'll read this poem of hers called Salt. Nicolas Flamel is a street in Paris near the quarter of the gays and the Jews, but of course, Nicolas Flamel was, too, a man. One day in the 14th century, he bought a book whose pages were bark. Its author, Abraham, the Jew, had been dispersed, as he wrote, through God's wrath into Gaul. Yesterday on the bus, I passed a mall in New Jersey. I dreamed of the dreams it stands there for. To help me dream, I purchased and steal, exchanged a lifetime of tears for 1 second of grace. Say what I say when my heart is sear. The bark book bought by Nicolas Flamel was acquired by him at a low price secondhand. It was full of hieroglyphs he firstly longed and secondly strove to understand. A humble notary, his mind and the mind of his beloved wife Perenelle were drawn to the needle's eye of mystery and out the other side. But what alchemy the two became wealthy, and with their wealth enacted a grand philanthropy is both known to us and not. But the sweetness of Nicholas and Perenelle survives their doings like a charm. Abraham the Jew, not to be confused with the biblical Abraham, though not necessarily unrelated to him, advocated the transmutation of base metals into gold as an expedient to avoid ruin by the taxmen of imperial Rome. Debt has a way of contriving mysteries. Allegory likewise pricks me in my bad feelings and in my practicalities too, if I even have any. I am high and low, but change the bad for the true as I can. I lie to myself to tell you the truth is one of the lies I tell to myself that is also a key to my secret wealth. Nicholas and Parnell did what they did hermaphroditically, occluding their money in the secrets of a living city that began to hide its past in the 19th century. I cannot know what you are, whom I could not also possibly be. There is more to it than that, but I mostly suck what sucks me.
Yeah, that,
I really love that poem. It's from her book Mercury, and it is super. There's a lot of variation in terms of what she's writing about and how she's writing, and it's a special book. So
yeah, there's so much in there in that one poem. It made a lot more sense to me hearing you read it than reading it myself. When just like there's such a difference in reading poetry.
prosody, yeah. No, I mean, I feel like poetry completely changed to me when I started reading it out loud, and I don't really feel like I became a writer until I started reading my own work out loud and hearing how it sounds. And I think that's like that's what I think is so powerful about poetry. I mean, we live in such a weird culture and a weird time that doesn't really respect the written word. And I mean, it's not that there isn't respect. Of course there is. Like, there are these like legendary writers, but I don't think that people are viewing, it's a challenge to read. It's a challenge for me to read. I constantly have to turn myself off from distractions, and I'm very distractible. Like, I love doing so many things at once, and I think something about poetry that I like is that you can read one poem and then stop. But I also like that you have to pay attention really a lot to that one poem that you're reading. So it's like an interesting kind of thing. But I think really like that storytelling tradition, or these like, poetic eddas and stories like Beowulf or the Odyssey, it's like very like, those are such magical texts, and poetry has the power to kind of preserve history and magic in verse and sound.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder, it's obviously my personal dream that poetry gets reinstated into like the central status that it deserves in culture, rather than just being seen as like a flamboyancy, like a whimsy, like, but
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, it's kind of weird to talk about sometimes too, because you and I were saying this. Like, I think of Crowley first as a poet, and I mean, not really like first, but I love his poetry best. Like, he really has this beautiful sense of how to use text in order to touch these mysteries. And when I read any of his invocations or hymns or, the Rites of Eleusis or something like that, it's like the text has such a big part of what's going on, and it's not just trying to sound high and heavy. It's really just kind of tapping into language as a tool, and sort of, which is what really, languages like Sanskrit or Hebrew do kind of naturally, but using English to sort of tap into mysteries when it's not necessarily this language of mystery.
yeah, totally. I
It's
totally
challenging,
agree.
but cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really like lubricated, like his way of like laying out words. Like after I read Jake Stratton Kent's Goetic Liturgy, I'd never used any thelemic stuff in my work, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna give this a try, like the Liber Pyramidos stuff, right? The opening and sealing of the pyramid, and it's just
Yeah,
so beautifully composed, and the involvement of the Eucharist at the altar is so great, like, and I
definitely.
definitely got
Yeah.
results, that I was surprised with, that I was just like, oh, this doesn't just work as an opening, like to get you in the right frame of mind. Like, what is operable about his magic has a lot to do with the play on words and the poetry itself, and how it lubricates,
Yeah.
like in a way that kind of like monastic Solomonic invocation might not, and it'd be almost like worth rewriting some of the like the other invocations you find throughout the grimoires to make more poetic sense, I feel like.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, it's fascinating because I think a lot of people, myself included, sort of resist Thelema, and I know I've talked to you about this, but it's really amazing. Like, I mean, it's been really amazing kind of getting to know people that are in the OTO without kind of necessarily joining myself, just because I have so much respect for it. But really, just the kind of diversity of the people involved is really special, and you know, kind of dipping a toe in is great. It's great for me right now, but it's really like it's something that I feel, you know, similarly to you. It was never really a part of my kind of regular practice. But there are certain elements that I've um, kind of invited in, and but for the most part, it always is. You know, it remains like I use his poetry a lot, or I'll like to recite it to certain spirits or deities, just because it's beautiful and it's just so. I mean, I just can't think of something that has more kind of. I mean, yeah, like the hymn to Pan is an incredible piece that is Pan is alive in that poem, and the invocation of Hecate is really also just such a lovely love poem too.
There's a really good version of someone reading the hymn to Pan on YouTube if you look it
Oh
up.
my God, I saw it before because I was originally looking to see if he had recorded it at all,
Yeah,
if he had ever kind of done an audio recording. But there is a really, I thought it was pretty funny, but I also adored it. Just that guy who is super jazzed on
super
the
jazzed. Yeah,
internet.
he's like just screaming. Yeah, he's like he's there. But yeah, I loved
It's amazing.
yeah how it like it's like Crowley and then Current 93 immediately, of course, just springing out of like Crowley's like voice and his like way of working with words, which kind of has this almost like at times it's almost this funny kind of like there once was a man from Nantucket kind of rhyme schemes,
Yeah, sometimes, totally, totally.
which is probably
Yeah, and
like
I
weak
love that.
or something.
I mean, it is hard to write a rhyming poem that doesn't sound corny. Like I have done a lot of kind of, I guess, I mean, occult in the sense of it's secret and nobody's ever going to read it kind of writing of just like these, I mean, you know, kind of similar like verse sort of invocations to different spirits, and it really is like it's special. But it's sort of weird because you can feel sometimes like you are. I think sometimes when you rhyme, you really feel like you're almost like miming the values of another era or something like that. But
Yeah,
again,
yeah, yeah.
that the rhymes do also have this special power as well.
No, I love the rhyming. I love rhyming and alliteration and just that, like, just making language play instead. And I mean, they think now that that's, we talked about this with Eli, but that language was abstract first and poetical first before it was ever technical. And that's, there's actually something that I was listening to. I made a note um, about Arlene Sakowski after you had sent some of her poems that I read. That was
Hmm.
great. That like both her and um, the two of the poets you sent were like talking about iron, in some of the work,
Yeah, yeah.
other work. But I heard an interview with her from the '80s where she's talking about like as language became more regulated, we lost a lot of the magic and a lot of the like operable like
Hmm.
magic ability. And she pointed out how like in Shakespeare, he'll just like whenever he wants use a noun as a verb or vice versa, like um
Yeah, please send me that interview. I haven't seen it. The way that I came upon this book was so strange. I found it in a library, and I think that she was a local writer, and it was just there because of that. And there are like no copies of this book online. There were like three. So I bought this signed copy because I just read it at this library in Portland, Oregon, years ago. And it's one of the most, I haven't read anything else by her. This book is the bomb. And yeah, I haven't ever seen that interview. So that's really cool.
yeah,
But
it's like a
her interesting language, her way of writing, it's just super weird.
yeah, her language is really weird. Also, like the other poet that talked about iron, that whose language,
Lola Ridge.
yeah, her language really impressed me. It was like really
I
like,
would love to read her out loud if you don't
yeah,
mind,
yeah,
just
please,
because
yeah.
I think it's a treat to kind of hear. But so this book, it's called The Ghetto and Other Poems. My friend Matt Wynn, who owns Molasses Books, he reprinted this book. It was first written in 1918. He reprinted it this year in 2018. It's beautiful. He still has copies available through Molasses Books, but all of these poems are incredible. Some of them rhyme, some of them don't. The story of Lola Ridge is that she is an New York-born kind of anarchist poet. Obviously, from 100 years ago, she was writing this, so she writes a lot about the working class and just sort of scenes of the city, but she has this mystical kind of voice. So I would love to share her poem, The Legion of Iron. It's like a good poem for Mars retrograde time. So, all right, The Legion of Iron. They passed through the great iron gates, men with eyes gravely discerning, skilled to appraise the tunage of cranes, or split an inch into thousands. Men tempered by fire as the ore is, and planned to resistance like steel that is cooled in the trough, silent of purpose, inflexible, set to fulfillment, to conquer, withstand, overthrow. Men mannered to large undertakings, knowing force as a brother and power as something to play with, seeing blood as a slip of the iron, to be wiped from the tools lest they rust. But what if they stood aside, who hold the earth so careless in the crook of their arms? What of the flamboyant cities and the lights guttering out like candles in a wind, and the armies halted, and the trains midway on the mountain, and idle men chaffing across the trenches, and the cursing and lamentation, and the clamor for grain shut in the mills of the world? What if they stayed apart, inscrutably smiling, leaving the ground encumbered with dead wire, and the sea to rowboats, and the lands marooned, till time should like a paralytic sit, a mildeweed hulk above the nations squatting?
Yeah, her poems are amazing. I love the use of language and the way it kind of feels like it like shifts and like,
It's dense too. I mean,
yeah,
her words are dense, and it's interesting because I don't normally love writing that's so dense, but it's like you can feel just the sort of navigation through these spaces, the way that she writes.
yeah,
And
totally.
like her language is like, accomplishing something in that respect. So
Yeah, it's very visceral, and I love her meditations on iron and ore. They're really like perfect for right now with Uranus and Taurus, and like the destabilization of materials and materials like shifting and changing. Like a really good time to kind of just put that in our minds, put like poetically, and like allow it to like kind of shift around. And I felt like reading that, it really spoke to me that she really does that or had that meditation in her life. Her story is really interesting.
yeah,
How she's Irish, but um, lived in she emigrated to New Zealand, right?
I don't actually know her like entire story, but just kind of the outline of her life. So
Yeah, yeah. I read a little bit on Wikipedia that she was like, like moved to the southern hemisphere and then to America, but is from Ireland. She was born in Ireland. Um, yeah, and then Arlene Zakowski, there was nothing really on, not much information on her at all. But I guess she's still alive. I think she's like 96.
she's still alive.
Yeah,
Wow, I should write to her. Yeah, I really there's another poem or another poet that I really love who is kind of a similar writer that you can't find any information, but like sometimes at a thrift store you'll find a book.
right, totally.
Um, music. And I think, Ree Dragonette, that other poet that I showed you, she's also kind of a similar figure. I think she's just a Philly lady, and I've never heard of her, and I saw that book and I bought it based on the title, and I was like, she's writing about John Cage and just like, kind of like movement and sound in these weird ways, but it's also sort of, she's writing about astrology and she's writing about like romance, and I was like, wow, this is really good. And I've never heard of her. I kind of tried to read about her, not a lot of information, so those kind of writers are always really interesting.
Yeah, I saw that she did like a collaboration with Eric Dolphy, and he ended up even doing some pieces that were inspired by her that don't have any poetry over them at all, but it's just like they're birthed from her poems. But they did like a record together where she reads poems and he plays. But I looked on YouTube and it's
Wow.
like not on there, or at least in my like
Man,
quick.
yeah, I gotta try to track that down. That
I was like,
sounds
no way.
excellent.
That's like that obscurity that like it's like this classic like the obscurity of poets, like how you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because that book it has some praise by Anais Nin on the back, but
Yeah, right.
I don't know how this woman never got out because she's great. So.
Yeah, I think like tying it back into starting with talking about Crowley and just like how
Mhm.
it's really important, I feel like, for especially grimoire magicians, right? That to realize that they're interacting with literature actively and like with poetry actively. That it's not they're not just like pulling the information out of books. Like it's like you're literally stepping into literature as like a dimension, and like that like understanding the poetics and getting really saturated in like the wordplay is just like maybe kind of a next step. Like it's really important for the occult community to like literaturize themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I had the realization this year, just 2 months ago, um, that I really want to go back to school, and it's weird because I didn't like school actually. I mean, I did like elements of school. Like I loved certain classes a lot, but of course it's like if you're doing your undergraduate education, you're not really like necessarily focusing on what you would love to focus on all the time. And I studied something more in the realm of art theory, but I really was like, wow, I totally want to go to graduate school and study like ancient Greek art history and sort of literature, which is kind of my next thing that I'm sort of working on. But I think it's really just that I mean, I don't know, it's like, I've been to the Metropolitan Museum a million times throughout my life, and I've seen art a million times in my life, but it's just being on this sort of path of this kind of magical life and interacting with these spirits and these beings and having this obsession with astrology and the planets and these different deities. It's really like it starts to take on this other dimension where kind of life becomes mythological and you want to like devote yourself to something through writing and learning and sort of the poetic universe. So
Yeah, totally. I've been thinking the exact same thing. And it's interesting like that it's like it becomes a whole dimension that you can just like keep filling up. And we talked before about like I think in the previous conversation about that like Christianity or like the classists or capitalist elements of fashion are a whole paradigm in themselves, and they're like a big object, like they have like a lot of resonance, but that like your own activity and your own like that dimension that you create through the work, like you can just like you can totally just like fire hose that with like mythology that you're living, but also that you're collecting. Like and that becomes like a big object. And that's
definitely.
kind of like that's the great work part of the work. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah.
rather than just like the results, but that's funny that it's like that's almost like a side effect of just doing the practical enchantment.
Definitely. Yeah, and it's interesting how the more that you kind of enter into that universe, the more it sort of claims you, and you're like, oh, like, now I just want to spend all my time worshiping Hermes,
Yeah, yeah,
something
right.
like that.
Yeah.
Like, it's very, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a different, I mean, it's So I was raised by an Egyptologist, but he is very much an academic, and I think he had a real interest in the occult when he was a younger person. And I got into it through him. He gave me my first deck of tarot cards and some books by White, and just some kind of like put me on that path. But he's basically an Episcopalian kind of mystic type now. But he really was like, he really approached Egypt and ancient culture in general through this academic lens. So it never was, I think in my family in a certain way it was sort of frowned upon to sort of see mythology as true.
Yeah.
In the sense that I do. And so it's interesting to kind of come back around, like my whole life, I might go to a museum and I see some kind of statue of Hecate, and it's beautiful, and I see it as this, relic of history and this art object from the ancient Greeks, and now seeing these things, it's just incredible to look at them, and you're like, this is a living artifact. This has spiritual presence, and just sort of mythologic presence, and really like having, this relationship with her as I do, and sort of these different, maybe seeing Pan, who is someone that I, invoke often. It's just a different thing, and you really start to feel like history hasn't died in the same way that you do. And if you're just looking at things through a purely academic lens, it's like it's not as lifelike, I guess.
Yeah, it's weird to like see them presented in a museum rather than a temple, but some of the statues you're looking at actually had someone in spirit them at some point. And so it's really interesting that you could be wandering down the street in New York and like eat a falafel out of a cart and then just wander into the museum and like be in the presence.
It's powerful. It's so powerful. And I love museums. I used to hate them. I don't love all museums, but I used to hate this like fucked up classist element of the museum that's just like, like you charge at the door. But it's like, at the Met, it's pay what you want. You can pay a penny, and like it's, it's so crowded, but I kind of love how crowded it is, because it's just like everybody and their mother is here to look at this art, and that art is sometimes magical, and just like the power of mythology is that it really changes your consciousness once you're exposed to it, regardless of your own kind of beliefs about it.
Yeah, certainly. I definitely want to get to talking about the saints, how we had mentioned, and Saint Augustine.
Oh yeah.
Because there's a definite, like, it ties in with what we're saying about, I was thinking about how it ties in with poetry and Crowley as a poet, and how that like is like kind of like the right elixir for people to drink to start letting him back into the conversation. People who just want to push the Lima out, you're like, well, he's a great poet, and that actually, and then like the second part of that is like, and that's actually what makes magic work in a way, is that
yeah.
Saint Augustine like has like a real bibliomantic kind of hagiography.
Yeah, no, and I think, I was telling you this, I think like St. Augustine is kind of my St. Cyprian. Like I think of him as this sort of, because like the story of St. Cyprian is that he converted because of his love. And like, yes, his love for God, but also his worldly love, who's also a saint. But so it's not like St. Cyprian is this guy who was sainted and kept on with his magical practice. And it's similar with St. Augustine. I think he's interesting because people kind of think of him as a pagan in the sense of his like Manichaean origin and his interest in that religion. But he was really this strange dualistic man who was very much into pleasure and hedonism and sorcery, really, and he waited a long time to be done with it. His famous quote is, "Grant me chastity, but not yet."
Right.
I guess
Totally.
the loose translation. So he really lived a full life. He really was invested in astrology and in Manichaeism, and eventually he came to decry astrology as literally demonic. But he still his entire kind of spiritual background is so present in his work, especially I think his Confessions, which is probably, honestly, if I had to name a favorite book, that might be it. Just because it is the first autobiography as we see it today, and it just contains so much pathos and so much that is so relatable, even though this is someone who lived just after Christ, and it's so long ago, but his spiritual longing is so palpable, and his kind of transition from being this sort of more selfish person and more kind of materially motivated person to being this saint, it's super, super touching. And I think even though he did end up kind of decrying his sort of more pagan origin, it's still so present in this sort of these like mystical love letters to God. It almost takes on this sort of quality of Rumi. I forget, there's this passage where he talks about how basically nothing isn't a part of God, and you might think that something is good or evil, but really it's all God. But it's worded in, I mean, I'll have to try to find this passage. Maybe I'll send it to you a later time. But yeah, I mean, it was just such a profound sort of wording of that sentiment that it's just, yeah, he really, he is so informed by his past.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I reread his entry in the Golden Legend and was it's long. It's one of the longer ones, and because it's very much informed by Confessions, so there's a lot in there. But and I was thinking about him as a patron saint of a magical practice and how that could operate, and it's not like when they say with Cyprian, some of the versions of it are that oh, he actually didn't stop practicing magic. He just did it on the slide and helped out the congregation. But then I was looking at St. Augustine and be like, well, what did he do after he converted? How is it useful? Just practically. And I was like, well, he was in a pretty hardcore ascetic, it was the second phase of life is extreme temperance and fasting, and so he'd be really good to work for quitting habits, or if you're fasting, invoking for a disinterest in food and drink, or there's this one part that he talks about he confesses to God for taking pleasure in watching a dog run.
Yeah.
And other stuff like that, where it's he got some pleasure from just seeing this cute dog, and he just was I have to go to confession. That was too good,
Yeah, he's such a strange man. I mean, but that moment of his conversion in the garden is honestly, it's to me, just it's just such a beautiful moment. I don't know, it's weird because I kind of, I hate anti-paganism in Christianity in some sense, but I love his conversion. I think it's truly I don't know. I mean, it just was his path. He was kind of this magical guy, but it wasn't really bringing him to God. And then he converted, and he found that connection through giving things up and through devoting himself.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's definitely that.
Just
he needed that
weird. I mean,
and
totally. It's what
for you as a Capricorn first house person.
Well, it's also just so strange because it's what ultimately drew him to confess too. It's such a strange idea of him.
Yeah.
He's all right. I don't know if maybe he felt like an underdog and he didn't feel like he deserved his place in the church, and he was here's my conversion. Here's what a bad guy I used to be. I don't know. It's always such a mystery to me. Is he bragging? Is he, what is his motivation?
He's agonizes over that too, being so extreme, but then being but I don't want to, I don't want to be famous for these acts, or I don't want any I don't want you to be like, oh, he's so amazing because he's being so extreme. Like he's kind of like afraid of that occurring.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of stuff I picked out that I saw would be kind of cool for working magically with Saint Augustine. One was
Mhm.
like Saint Bernard, when he was still alive, like prayed to him and received a vision of like just like torrents of water pouring out of his mouth and filling the church, and that was like to represent like all the knowledge because he was known to be like very knowledgeable. And so that was like a cool kind of visualization that you could use, is just like this like that fountain of just like knowledge as water just like exploding out of St. Augustine's mouth. Because he was like, he claims that he taught himself Aristotle, and that has like as like a young man, like as like a child essentially, and that has like
Mhm.
so many grimoires were just labeled Aristotle like over the years, like so that people like wouldn't get caught, with illicit books. So like you can kind of bend it towards that. He also, there's like a charm he makes against gossip, where at one point where he like carves this charm on like a table, so there could be like an Augustinian like
Charm against gossip. Love it.
yeah, like an
I mean, this is a great passage. If you'd like me to read it, that I think could
yeah,
be
yeah,
could be used in. I mean, you're talking about this torrent of tears and sort of giving up a habit. So I think, I mean, this part of his confessions is kind of perfect. Um, the frivolity of frivolous aims, the futility of futile pursuits, these things that had been my cronies of long standing, still held me back, plucking softly at my garment of flesh and murmuring in my ear, "Do you mean to get rid of us? Shall we never be your companions again after that moment? Never, never again? From that time onwards, so-and-so will be forbidden to you all your life long." And what was it that they were reminding me of, those words, so-and-so? Oh my God, what were they bringing to my mind? May your mercy banish such memories far from me. What foul deeds were they not hinting at, what disgraceful exploits? But now their voices were less than half as loud, for they no longer confronted me directly to argue their case, but muttered behind my back and slyly tweaked me as I walked away, trying to make me look back. Yet they did slow me down, for I could not bring myself to tear free and shake them off and leap across to that place whither I was summoned, while aggressive habits still taunted me. Do you imagine you will be able to live without those things? But as this deep meditation dredged all my wretchedness up from the secret profundity of my being and heaped it all together before the eyes of my heart, a huge storm blew up within me and brought on a heavy rain of tears. In order to pour them out unchecked with the sobs that accompanied them, I rose and left Alypius, for solitude seemed to me more suitable for the business of weeping. I withdrew far enough to ensure that his presence, even his, would not be burdensome to me. This was my need, and he understood it, for I think I had already risen to my feet and blurted out something, my voice already choked with tears. Many things I had to say to you, and the gist of them, though not the precise words, was, "O Lord, how long? How long? Will you be angry forever? Do not remember our age-old sins, for by these I was conscious of being held prisoner." I uttered cries of misery. Why must I go on saying, "Tomorrow, tomorrow"? Why not now? Why not put an end to my depravity this very hour? So that's from book 8 of the Confessions, and it's 26 and 28. But
uh, yeah, I love,
yeah, I just feel like I'm like, wow, that could be amazing to use to give up a habit during this kind of Saturn and Capricorn period.
yeah, totally. Yeah, and the stress on tears you see throughout all his stuff. Like there, one point, there's something about curing the sick with like taking oil and mixing it with your tears, and then that's what you use to anoint so that you can heal. Like
Wow, that's beautiful.
so that's another like kind of practical way that you can like work St. Augustine magically, and just as like asking him for more knowledge, in general that
I
like
have a confession, which is that I'm
yeah.
wearing my St. Augustine shirt for the occasion.
Oh no.
I have a shirt, so yeah, I kind of like, I mean, I've praised him a lot, and I kind of like, my deal with him is that I talk about him a lot, much like I do with some of the Goetic spirits, and like, just, I mean, spirits love to be talked about, and as far as St. Augustine, like, I thoroughly vet his intentions towards humanity. He's just trying to get everybody beyond the things that hold them back, which is beautiful to me. So
Yeah, and that's Bonnie, that's part of the thing with Saint Martha too, right? That like spreading the
oh yeah, her feast day was yesterday, is that correct? Or two
Yeah.
days ago?
Yes, it was yesterday.
Cool.
Jason Miller said that being that Saint Martha was a proselytizer, that would perhaps be a good way to thank her. And I definitely think she appreciates that, but she loves gifts too.
Yeah, that's my first name, Martha. So
Yeah.
I always liked her, and she's interesting because then, like syncretically, the way that she's linked to, I guess it's Mami Wada is what I've gathered. Who is, I mean, similarly, Martha's always got the dragon underneath her foot, and Mami Wada's friends with the snake. But it's interesting, the whole Saint Martha and then like Saint Martha the Dominator kind of situation. But yeah, it's funny too because if you call one of them, I feel like they both come.
Yeah, it's like it's almost like part of your job, like in practice, to not to treat them separately, even though like you could get both,
Yeah.
Yeah, we celebrated her feast last night and we thought about like how it was perfect that we were going to talk to you and your first name is Martha and then like
oh great,
and that like it all lined up, but then when you sent your topics originally and I like started reading up about stuff. I was reading in the Golden Legend about Saint Augustine being such an ascetic, like during the eclipse, which is a K2 South Node eclipse, where like K2 is so ascetical. And then the next entry is in the Golden Legend is about the beheading of Saint John. So it was like perfect. Like,
oh wow,
like the snake, like K2 is the snake, like the serpent
right,
head cut off, who's an ascetic. I was like, oh, this is like on the day of the
that's
eclipse.
awesome.
I was like, oh, perfect.
Yeah, and also just shout out to Saint Martha because, I mean, she's not necessarily, we're not as close as me and Augustine, but she's been there. She's cool.
Yeah.
She's a cool lady.
Want to explain what you work with Saint Martha for a little bit?
Well, I do think she's very helpful in letting go of habits. If you think of this like dragons within yourself and kind of being able to subdue them, I found her very helpful for that, and just providing for the house and the basic needs, but plus some. I really just have a great love for her. I can't describe it properly.
Yeah, it's like you have to go into poetry mode to describe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and she also is such a truly, I mean, she really will help women in kind of any situation. I found like she's not a spirit you necessarily have to like butter up to get her assistance. She's no Saint Expedite. She's gonna eat a pound cake at the end, but she'll just kind of come and help. And yeah, I think she's a real presence, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think you kind of get like, I mean, I don't personally work with her, but Bonnie does, so I observe it. Like the results of it is like, it's kind of like that strength card kind of thing where like, you're not necessarily doing like directed sorcery for like concentrating on a sigil for this one result that you want, but like the practice and ongoing in general just starts to make your life work out, like much easier, she just kind of seems like she gets,
which to be honest, we should all be doing more magic like that.
Yeah, totally.
We should all be doing a little more subtle magic to get your life to work a little better, because everything is, I mean, it's very interesting doing that kind of like, the difference between that sort of like results-based approach or this sort of, offerings and prayers approach. I think they're both yeah, that kind of more subtle way is sort of more effective sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's like a good. I'm doing like a class on this next week on like magical practice basics, where you're just like, if you have like these 6 or 7 things that you do ongoingly, you can just put whatever magical tradition on that you want to run just on top of that. And like, but that basic stuff that just makes your life work better, like can, like we were talking about how like the astrology is kind of poor right now. So all those
Mm,
practices still stand, like you're still like gonna carry
right, of
through,
course.
without
Yeah.
having good like astrological leverage to like do certain.
Yeah, things that are kind of going to keep you on the boat,
Yeah,
like when
totally.
the ocean gets rocky. Yeah. No, I mean for me, I'm going tomorrow morning to my ancestral home, which is this house that was built by my great grandparents, and which it's just been this sort of refuge space for my family, especially the women in my family. There are a lot of women in my family. My mom has 3 sisters, so yeah, it's like this house that I mean it's a whole saga. I could go into it, but really, like, when my mom and my dad first split, we moved from Texas to Pennsylvania. My mom, my brother, and I all lived in the attic of this house. Long story short, we eventually my mom basically inherited this house, and for someone who grew up, I mean, we kind of moved a lot. We never really had a really kind of stable situation when I was a kid. So it was really just this house that had kind of always been there for our family. And when I go back there and I do magic in that house, it's just, both my great grandparents died in the room that I stay in, and it's just like such a beautiful. Every time I go there, it's just like my life gets better from there, which is so beautiful.
Yeah, like it's just automatic. Like I think like performing magic where you grew up or where your folks live or in your grandparents' house or whatever, I've definitely noticed like those are like some of the strongest workings. You'll like they
Yeah, and it's almost
off.
like I just feel selfish. Like I think my mom wants to leave this town, and I wouldn't want to live in that town either. But then I'm just like, don't sell the house. Like the house is just so special. It's like a living being, some respects.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and it's weird. I don't know if everyone experiences this, but so much of my dreams, no matter what the situation is, it just takes place in either my parents' house or my grandmother's house. That like you're like, oh,
Yeah.
well, if that's where it's going on in like in the dream realm or in the spirit world or whatever, then that's where the magic like is like should be situated.
Totally, totally. Yeah, I mean, I haven't even made any kind of magical plans for my trip. I feel like I'm just gonna maybe like light a candle and pray or something, but it's definitely, yeah, I think it's always interesting, those links and sort of, I mean, yeah, and I think just going back to what we were talking about with just sort of like these practices that are sort of your go-to no matter the astrological weather. I mean, for me, always got a altar to my family. My grandmother she just got really sick, and I thought she was going to die a couple weeks ago, or really close, and like I just was like, bam, like lit that candle
Yeah, totally.
on the altar and was like, please, like let her pull through, and she got bacterial, oh my God, what is it called? She got a bacterial infection, and then she had a heart attack, and she got out of the hospital. She's like fine. She's 94. I'm like,
Well,
all right, thank you, answering the prayers,
yeah,
because
awesome.
gotta like at least see her one more time. So
Yeah, that's definitely the first thing on the list with the magical basics course that I was going to do is like ancestors, like and
yeah, no,
living family too. Some people have like a hard relationship with their family and with their ancestors. They don't want anything to do with it, and it's like when
yeah,
you can look at it abstractly. Like I've talked to someone about this that I don't know if I haven't read it anywhere, but it really feels like your mother's 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 mother, like that far back, has maybe like something happens there that they have the ability to just represent the matriarchal line in general.
yeah. No, I got some graveyard dirt from my mother's 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 mother. Um, she is, yeah, I went into her grave and I met her, lit a candle, did some divination. I paid for some graveyard dirt and I use it around, and it's like, I mean, it's also interesting because it's like, I mean, I don't know how much this relates, but just I'm, an anti-natalist basically, and one of the biggest reasons I just think about it, it's like you have children, and suddenly, like 5 generations later, you're still getting called back to pull favors.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're like karmically tied forever. Like
Yeah.
I just think about that, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I mean, yeah, it's like talking to someone who might be adopted, say, who maybe doesn't know about their ancestry. But I think you can still, I mean, your ancestors know who you are. So if you leave something for them, even if you don't know much about them, if you just kind of start to work with them, they're sort of bound to help you, really.
Yeah,
And
totally.
I mean, I think that they like to. I like to think that they. I like to think that they like to. I hope that they like to,
Well, you're
but
the
I think that they will for sure.
you're their progeny, so you're the one that still has like hands, and like you're physically
And you
manifested.
have their karma too. I mean,
Yeah.
you're perfecting their karma. Like,
Mm.
I have a kind of, sort of, I guess, difficult relationship with one of my parents, and it's always interesting to just think of that in terms of something that my reader that I was talking about earlier said to me was like, well, you just have to think about the fact that like you are sort of your parents' unrealized ambitions, and you just are sort of here to sort of perfect their karma as well. And I think it's true. We really just have to take the best of the past and try to sort of alchemize that into sort of, yeah, trying to realize, um, you could say, the great work, or just sort of these higher goals and higher ambitions, and sort of transcend the challenges a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Like it's one of the couple like continuums that you harken back to, that you're just like, well, I'm just working for this thing, you know.
Totally, totally.
Um, so I was curious about the cards that you might have pulled.
Oh yeah. Uno momento, por favor.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not on this, so I gotta stabilize them with some weights so I can check them out. They're really positive, to be honest. So that's good.
Yeah, I think astrologically a lot of it's looking up, like if,
It already feels better
yeah, totally.
after Friday.
Yeah, we could really feel, with the sun and rulership, like you can really feel it on the planet's day. Like Sundays are great, like,
hmm Yeah. No, it's great. So yeah, I mean, it's weird because I don't do a lot of kind of. I mean, I guess I don't do a lot of kind of generalized tarot. I think it's such a personal thing. But I was thinking when I pulled these cards just about, I guess, about what people could kind of look forward to in the month in terms of the astrology. So kind of trying to tie the cards to a different interpretation of what might be going on collectively for everybody. So of course it's general, but yeah, I just did a very simple spread, which is the past, present, and future. And then I like to pull these 4 cards that is sort of like desires, needs, things to know, and advice to take.
mm,
So I'll just kind of go through with the cards that I pulled. It's the Six of Swords, the Queen of Wands, the Magician, the Ace of Cups, the Knight of Wands, the King of Cups, and the Knight of Swords. So, yeah, I mean, really, to me, I feel like this is going to be a really, I think despite all of the sort of fiery tendencies, there's a lot of beauty on the way. I think with that kind of solar element creeping in, there's going to be this sort of strengthening of will and selfhood. It seems also like a really good time to sort of step step forward boldly into sort of the challenges that you're facing, and sort of be aware that things are indeed, at least emotionally, going to lighten up a little bit. I think it's going to be a little bit sweeter this month than this coming August. So.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, definitely like looking at the astrology, like you said with the beauty, it's like Venus is going to be in rulership too. And so you get a lot of these aspects that with like what's going on with the sun and Leo and then Mercury like retrograde in Leo and then turning around, stationing and going direct. And just
Mm-hmm.
when I was writing the forecast, like I'll like doing it for the whole month, I'll realize stuff like phrases just repeating over and over, but coming from different planets. And you're like, okay, yeah, this is getting really supported.
Right.
It's that whole like
Yeah.
that boldness that you mentioned and
Mm-hmm.
character analyzation, and with with like with things that are like connecting with Jupiter, aspecting with Jupiter in Scorpio being like the
Mm-hmm.
like that like in the second decan being like that really intense engagement between people when you're in a real intense like interaction with someone that you know like and then you're these two different characters but meanwhile Venus is in Libra, so there's that like equilibrium and diplomacy, that like charm and poise like that's brought to the whole thing. So it was this kind of really it was like light and interesting, but you know, it's like a lot of heavy topics might still be on the table, which is like obvious
Yeah.
just from like the state of the world, right? You know, but like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the state of where people are at, because Saturn and Capricorn is like a Saturn return for everybody collectively. You know, we're all having an intense Saturn time, and so there's a lot of heavy stuff being
Mm-hmm.
discussed, but like that like ability to like discuss it in a charming way and like
Yeah. Seeing the Ace of Cups and the Knight of Wands together, instantly you're just like, avoid overly heavy topics, approach
yeah,
the world with a sense of lightness and fun, and like run into things. It's like seems more like a time to sort of try to enjoy yourself rather than to necessarily figure it out. At least for me, looking at these cards, that's the kind of vibe I'm getting.
yeah, that makes total sense. Like what we were saying about since the astrology's kind of whacked out, that you have to go into a period of kind of like how we were saying it's more of a time for witchcraft than astrological magic. Like
Definitely.
you have to like embody and engage the body and like root your experience in the body and kind of just like let that imprint like fall into yourself to like have it make sense in a non-analytical manner, you know?
Yeah, and I mean also just looking at these cards, what comes to my mind is if you've been struggling this summer with levity a little bit like I have, I think it's going to be a good time to get your mojo back. I mean, there's a lot of mojo in these cards, so.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely see that with Mars stationing in exaltation is definitely
Mhm.
people are going to get their swagger back like
Yeah.
later in the month
Yeah.
and be like, "Oh damn, I'm awesome. Like I'm the man. Like I'm really competent." You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, Knight of Wands, King of Cups,
Yeah,
Magician. I'm just
totally.
like, sounds fun to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like traveling a bit this week, going home, as I said, and then I'm coming back and going camping with somebody, and I'm just super excited to, well, I have some time off this summer, which is wonderful, and just kind of enjoying that, and sort of like, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to like getting my mojo back a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely felt the mojo back shift for sure. We definitely like ran into that last night. Maybe St. Martha
Awesome.
helped with that.
Yeah.
We were like, oh, there it is.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
So yeah, I feel like we could go on forever, but we should probably let you go soon. I'm really, really curious about
Sure.
the like Goetia and true crime angle, but I don't know if like
We'll
that's
get to it another time.
but that's like
um
definitely
yeah, no, I love it's like, wow, where can I connect those two, my two biggest passions? I actually am on a break from true crime right now because I got a little too obsessed with murder for the past year, and I'm like, all right, time to cleanse my mind
yeah.
of these dubious details because I'm thinking too much about this. But Yeah, I mean, before you go, I have a question for you if you would like to answer it.
Sure.
Because I think this might be relevant to other people that are listening, possibly. What would you say people, if you haven't done magical work with someone before and you're just kind of starting that relationship? I mean, an individual, not anybody, but how do you go about kind of forging a magical relationship with somebody new? Like, what kind of things do you do? I guess that it doesn't totally relate to our conversation, but I was like, I bet you know a good answer to this.
With
So,
another person, like teaming up with someone, you mean?
yeah, like how do you go about, like, what are the kind of steps you personally take when you're beginning to work with someone new magically?
I guess like kind of like kind of going way off book, you know? Like just kind of like
Mm.
designing some rituals together that like kind of like we've done about like 10 years ago, we moved rurally to Maine, like, and kind of really like wanted to keep like a big distance from the scene, you know, and kind of got
Mhm.
more into reading like you know, like romantic literature than keeping up
Yeah.
with like the occult, you know, and kind of like
Uh-huh.
in the last few years kind of started tuning back into what the official occult world was talking about. But in that interim,
Yeah.
we like designed our whole own kind of like methodology that was really involved. And I a lot that like brought a lot of people together that didn't practice in the same.
Are these your ceremonies that I've heard people talk about?
Yeah, yeah. But that was like a way to really like find out how people work or like what how people fit into like a magical kind of operation together without trying to like to like use something so scripted is just kind of
Pre-existing, yeah.
yeah, to design something with someone else that is like organic, you know, and go through the process. And from there, you can probably start picking up like other things that you want to work with that you're just like, oh, I'm also interested in this and interested in this. Like I'm interested in talismans or I'm interested in like
Mhm.
necromancy. But so doing something completely kind of off book and organic first would probably be, I think that would be the way to go.
Perfect. And when you sit down and you design a ritual, do you sit down and you say, what are our mutual aims, or do you just kind of, like, I don't know, arrive at something?
Well, I guess we were like really got really into like bioregionalism and pastoralism, and so we just were like
Oh.
we just got really like focused on the seasons, you know, and just
Mhm.
it kind of we were really aware of trying to not be neo-pagan, you know, like that wasn't
Yeah,
what it
yeah.
was about. It was, but it was closer to witchcraft, but without calling it witchcraft um, or like referencing anything from that culture. It's like we just kind of turned all that off and just did our own thing,
Mhm.
you know. But like looking right at the seasonal cycle, like without even thinking about it too much astrologically, is just like the rituals sort of build themselves just by like interacting with
Mhm.
like ephemera that's around
Mm.
you and like just like following chains of synchronicities and stuff.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for having me on and talking to me about all these interesting subjects. I'm certainly feeling inspired and like learning more.
Yeah, thanks for
Likewise,
yeah,
yes. Thank
likewise,
you. That was
definitely.
nice.
Like we obviously could talk forever, so we should
Yeah, come to New York City and we'll
yeah,
talk. We should talk or teach a workshop or something.
totally, absolutely. Okay, well, thanks very much.
Yeah, have a wonderful day, you too. Thank you again.